basically is that I lived kind of like a two-person life. On one point, I was a IT specialist, and I managed my own IT firm along with my brother, as well as I was what you would consider an outlaw biker. I was a Harley guy. I have plenty of tattoos, and I was a dad, and that was pretty much my life. Is I kind of like said that I worked hard and played hard, and I was a good provider for my family. But boy, I certainly enjoyed my Harley Davidsons and riding. And I lived at the time in New York, and so there was plenty of seashore and plenty of great places to go riding. And that was my life for a long time. I started driving motorcycles when I was just a very young child. Nearby, there was an open field, and there wasn't too many things to do in Long Island at that time. There was no internet, and so I would watch the kids drive mini bikes and motorcycles on the dirt fields. And then as soon as I was old enough, I got a paper route, and then I was up to buy my first dirt bike. And from there on, for the next 40 or 50 years, I rode every day. I lived outside Manhattan, New York City, and I had many clients in Manhattan. And I would take my motorcycle, my Harley Davidson, in the city whenever I would go to visit clients. And I always considered it like it was a video game, but I was on my last guy. And that was really true. And my clients didn't seem to mind too much. I was very an unconventional character driving a Harley Davidson, to my very, corporate clients. But I did have a lot to offer. I was very much into computers at the time and technology, and I brought a lot to the plate. It was just such a wonderful thing. It was something that's so natural to me because I started so young, and I love to feel the wind through my hair, and I really enjoyed it, especially down by the beach on Fire Island. I would ride my Harley Davidson all up and down Ocean Parkway with my friends, and we would go different places, and we really enjoyed it. It was a great way to get around, and we never had to worry about parking. What I was sharing is that I loved riding on Long Island, and down by Long Island there is a place called the Hamptons. It's on the eastern edge of Long Island. It's where all the movie stars go from New York City for the long weekends. And what I would do is I'd ride my Harley Davidson out there, and I'd go to a small barbecue place, which I enjoyed very much. It was an out of the way place, which you would never take notice of, but they had the best barbecue. And so one early spring afternoon, as I went out there, and I had some great barbecue. It's a couple hours away from where I lived at the time. And then I was time to go home. And so I got back on the road to head back home, but the traffic was backed up for miles. And it was unusual for that time of year. In the summertime, yes, that happened all the time, but it was kind of chilly and it was springtime. And I would imagine like perhaps there was some road construction or an accident ahead. And what happened is that I noticed that people, after about an hour of sitting there holding this heavy Harley Davidson up for a while in traffic, just stop and go, an inch here, an inch there, I noticed people were driving on the shoulder to make a right-hand turn at an upcoming cross intersection to get out of the traffic. So after a while, I decided that's what I would do. Is I got up on the shoulder and I rode my Harley Davidson until I got to the intersection. And just when I was making a right-hand turn, someone from the opposite direction, someone had let them in. So they made a left-hand turn and crashed right into the side of my motorcycle. And to me, the lights went out in my mind. Is that next thing as I knew, I was laying on the ground and I was looking up, and there were a whole load of emergency vehicles all around me. And I saw that it was darker out, like a great deal of time had passed. And I remember looking around and saying to myself, or thinking to myself, that my life was going to change forever. There's no way I'm getting up and walking out of this. In fact, when I started to get up, I felt an intense, sharp pain in my leg, like my leg wasn't connected anymore. The skin was still there, but it just stung so badly. And then I went out again. And then the next thing is I knew, I was flying through the air, and I was going higher and higher and higher, and actually going through the clouds. And You know, what do you think when that happens? And but just then I started coming down out of the clouds. And then I looked down at the ground and I saw a big H with a circle around it. And I realized that I was in a helicopter, actually outside a helicopter on like some sort of a I'm not sure what you would call it. It's kind of like you would see in MASH, in the old MASH movie, where they would evacuate injured and soldiers on the outside of the helicopter. And I was being airlifted to Stony Brook Hospital. It was one of the most premier trauma centers in the United States. And I just happened to live nearby. It was a university teaching hospital. My mother graduated from there. I graduated from there. My daughter graduated from there. I was very familiar with the place. And they came out and they brought me into surgery. And I was gravely injured. In fact, a doctor once told me when he was reviewing my medical records that these are actually most often associated with autopsies, not with people who survived. And I was just so fortunate to have perhaps the best medical care you could possibly get on this planet. It was so true. And I had a traumatic brain injury. I had my whole left side was crushed. My leg had a compound fracture, my arm, my shoulder, my back. It was, and I had internal injuries. I was bleeding profusely, and I actually had to have several operations over several days to get the bleeding under control. And once I was stabilized, I was put on a ventilator, and I was in a coma. And to the rest of the world, I was laying in my hospital bed for the next month. But to myself, I was in another place, a place I call between here and there. I don't think it's where you go when you die, but I think it's kind of like an in-between place, kind of like what the Catholics call purgatory. But it wasn't a place of punishment. It was a place of understanding or enlightenment, where perhaps you are being prepared to go from a physical state into a spiritual state, and perhaps making sense of what you had experienced and actually learning from it. And that's what it was like for me. It was a very surreal experience, deeply rooted in my experience. What I experienced was unique to me, and I believe it's unique to everybody, because what I was presented with wouldn't make sense to somebody perhaps in the Philippines or in Africa or in China, or someone had a very different experience than me. I believe that my experience was tailored to what would reach me and help me understand things. And that was the truth, is that I think that the lessons you learn are the same, but it's just the way that in which you learn them. And since I was a computer guy, the very first thing that I was presented with was a computer situation where I was helping clients. In fact, I didn't know I was anywhere else. I really didn't. Is that I thought I was just another work day. But the first thing that I noticed is that I was introduced to a gentleman who I've known was one of my clients years ago, and I hadn't seen him in 20 years. And I was just helping him with his computer stuff. But something was odd about him, is that I saw that he hadn't changed in 20 years. And I thought, wow, just good genes or something. I just didn't think anything of it. And I remember this gentleman well, because he was from Haiti, and he had a way of talking. It was part English, part French, and part some sort of Creole language. And so if he felt he wasn't reaching you, he would kind of like, he had a lot of mannerisms about him. And he was a wonderful guy. I really enjoyed his company. But like I said, I hadn't seen him in 20 years. And then I helped him with his computer stuff. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. And then I saw him again, but he had aged 20 years. And at first I thought he was his father or something. And then I said, are you so-and-so? And he said, yeah, you got me. And I thought, wow, that was kind of weird. And then I would see him again, and he would be a young child, or he'd be a woman, or he would be an Asian person, or an African person, or a European type person. You know, he would present it to me in all these different forms, and I'd have to kind of guess if it was him or not. And it just seemed very strange. And it would be like he would tip me off because I would see one of his mannerisms, or I would see a word that he would use. And I would say, "Oh, aren't you so and so?" It was like a game we played. But after a while, is that I relied less on those mannerisms and more on like an energy I felt. There was like everybody has an energy, even in the physical realm. You could feel it, you could sense it. And so after a while, I relied less on his appearance or his words or his mannerism, and more like the energy I felt from him. And after a while, I didn't even have to see him. I could just sense when he was around me. And what I felt I was being shown the very first time is that to feel and sense the energy in everybody and everything, that perhaps everyone's energy is different, but together we share a similarity. We share the energy of what I call the universe. And perhaps all of our energy make up the creation itself. That perhaps, and I'm just saying this isn't the universe according to Stevie Weber, perhaps the creator and the creation are one. Whether you believe in the Big Bang or let there be light, we all come from a single source, and we all learn and grow through our experiences. And that was instrumental in what I learned, because now I had this knowledge. I looked around me and I saw everything. Everything had an energy, whether it was people, animals, plants, stars, planets, and it all made sense to me. And that truly was the first experience I had, and that was necessary in going to my next experience. And it's not like I had control over what was going on, but also I didn't feel there was a source that was controlling things either. I felt I was presented with the situation. I couldn't determine what that situation would be, but I had free choice and free will within that situation. And when I stopped learning in a specific situation, that's when I was presented with the next one. And another thing is that time wasn't like it was here, is that time didn't move if you weren't learning. You know, it gave you the sense of time moving. It wasn't like there were sunrises and sunsets, unless that was part of your experience. It was more like, and you know, you didn't have appointments in the future. You didn't see a clock ticking. You know, it was just different. The only way you sensed time was that you could sense what you've learned and how you learned it over a period of time, what you were then and what you are now. It gave you a sense of time. And I noticed that when I was learning, at first, the learning, whatever I was experiencing, went very slow, painfully slow. It like took forever. And I felt like I had plenty of time there, if you know what I mean, is that, and it was painfully slow. But once I would start to learn, time would go fast. And I'd also receive a lot of bliss from it, because as I began to learn, I started to break free of all of the constraints of physical life. Like I didn't feel hate or animosity or jealousy or shame towards myself or other people. And no one felt that way about me, because I resolved these things in my mind. And what was really critical to that was my next experience was a life review. And that was everything. In fact, what I learned in my life review that I did over and over again, because as I would go through my life review the first time, when I was done, my awareness would be raised. And then I'd go through my life review again with this raised awareness, and I would see more and more each time. And it wasn't like I was a voyeur looking in on different scenes of my life. It was like I was everywhere and everything. It's kind of like when I learned in Catholic school that Jesus is everywhere. You know, what Jesus is always looking at me. You can see me when I'm going to the bathroom and stuff. Like what did that mean? But now I truly understood it. It's like I was everywhere and I sensed everything. And now I could sense everyone's energies. I could figure out why they were there. And everyone had a separate reason, a different reason for being in every circumstances. There was a physical reason and a spiritual reason why everyone was there. And so as I started going through these experiences with my new awareness and my ability to feel energy, is that I learned so much. And one of the things I learned was that some of the worst experiences of my life. And I haven't had a terrible life. I've had good times and bad times like everybody else. But some of the heartbreaking, the most challenging times of my life, those were the ones that brought me the most bliss. Because as I learned from those experiences, is that I felt like lighter, I felt happier, I resolved things. Because sometimes what prevents you from facing things and learning things is things like shame or regret or fear. Like sometimes, you'd be thinking about something that happened and you realize you really did something really messed up and you can't face it. But once you are able to face it, you were able to resolve it in your own mind. It's not like I saw pretty flowers. I didn't see Jesus. It wasn't like that, or beautiful scenes like people say it's bliss. What was my bliss was being relieved of all of the challenges and all of the pains and difficulties of physical life and learning from it and all making sense. And that was my life review. It just went on and on and on. And then when I stopped learning from that experience is when I was my next experience, which was I was put in charge of a group of young adults, and I had to teach them a task. And no matter what I did, they wouldn't learn this task. And that was especially challenging because they would listen, they would say yes, yes, yes. But then when it was time to do the tasks, they would disappear. And then when I would see them again, they would be like, nothing's wrong. And I'd be like, what are you talking about? I asked you to do this. And no matter what I did, they just wouldn't listen. I mean, they would listen, but they wouldn't do it. And they seemed so sincere each time. It's like something wasn't clicking. I couldn't be mad at them. It was like, And pretty much when I was at my wit's end, I stood before the gentleman who felt like was running things. And it's not like I said words. It's just like I thought things. And I would receive answers, but not in someone else's voice. Like it gave me the ability to figure it out myself. And when I stood before this person, I realized I was looking at myself. Not myself, Stevie Weber, in the here and now, but perhaps my higher self. And what I learned is perhaps when you have a physical experience that not all of your consciousness comes down. I use that term figuratively, comes down in physical form. Just part of you comes down to experience physical life with the ignorance of all your past experiences. Because if you had that knowledge, you wouldn't be able to make the mistakes and learn from them, which are so critical to physical life. And as you make those mistakes and you learn from them, you grow in the here and now, but also your higher self grows. And the more you experience, the more you learn, the more bliss and the more aware you become. And once I stood before my higher self and understood this, all of a sudden I looked at everything with a new sense of eyes. Is that I wasn't there to teach the kids some tasks. They were actually spirits, energy that had yet to have a human experience. And I was there to give them, to guide them, to mentor them into their first physical experience. You see, I was trained and learned all these things through my life review and how to read energy and see things. And I didn't see any of that in the kids. Is that all I saw was a bunch of dopey kids who wouldn't learn. I didn't see them as spirits that I had to guide. And that changed everything for me and for them, because I was able to guide them into their physical existence. But everyone had a purpose there. And there was this lady there who kept on praying. And I didn't understand what she was doing there. She didn't seem to have a purpose. But when I listened to her prayers, it's like I really couldn't hear the words, or perhaps the words didn't matter. But what the words seemed to me to be like a highway under which this energy traveled. It was like a love. It was an energy. It was a strength that I was actually connected with. And it was that energy which helped me understand things and helped me put one foot in front of the other when things became very tough for me. And I just wondered why she was there, but the beauty and the bliss I received from her presence and her prayers was, I don't think I would have made it. I don't think I would have made it without it. I really don't. And then after a while, I was presented with the next experience. And I come from a small town on Long Island in New York called Kings Park. And there's a bluff, a cliffs that overlook the Long Island Sound. And at the end of every day, all the towns, not all the townspeople, but a lot of people go to the bluff and with coffee cups or red Solo cups, which aren't coffee cups. And we would talk about the town gossip and watch the sunset. And town gossip, like who's doing who, and those kind of things. It was a lot of fun. And I was there with my two old friends, Joey and Johnny, and they were both in their late 70s, and they were really good folk. John was he suffered from diabetes, and he always struggled with his leg. He was kept on getting infections and such, but he would deal with the readings in church, and he would sound like, I don't know, like Moses or something. He would do the readings and he would say, and Jesus said, and the place would shake. He had this baritone voice. He was such a good guy. I really enjoyed him. And Joey, he was an Irish guy, and he talked with a brogue, and he was a raconteur, a teller of tall tales, and he could tell a story. He really could. And he was a lot of fun, and his wife was just a wonderful lady, and I really enjoyed them both. But he actually injured himself as a young kid at the bluff. He was diving, and he hit his head, and he broke his spine, and they had to do an operation. So for the rest of his life, he walked around like Frankenstein. He had to move his whole body to get it to move, but he was always happy. It really was. And
Is he fine right now?
Excuse me?
Is he doing good right now?
Well, I'm just going
Go
to
ahead.
talk about that now. Yeah. And so I would sit there with the sunset and watch the sunset with them. And it was great. But as this went on over and over again, closer to 1 million than one time, it just went over and over again. I realized that both Joey and John had passed earlier that year. And wow, just like everything changed. And I kept on thinking to myself, like, how could this be? Like, all these strange things had been happening to me, and I don't know why it didn't occur to me like anything was out of the ordinary. I was just dealing with situation after situation, although some of those situations were very surreal. And I just didn't make sense of it until Joey and Johnny, and realizing that they were there and that they had passed. And I wanted to know why they were there, why we were there. And I kept on thinking that as we went through these sunsets over and over again. And the sunsets weren't there to measure time. They were part of the experience. And that's what I was saying about time moving, is that it wasn't to mark time. It was setting up this experience with Joey and John. And I wanted to ask them what they were doing there. And this happened time and time again. And I felt like I don't know, I didn't want to ask them. It was just, I just don't know why. Maybe it was because that I didn't want to know the answer, or I just didn't know why. But finally, it got to the point that that if I didn't get this chance to ask them now, I would never get this chance again. And finally, I thought to myself that I wanted to know why they were here. And they let me know that the reason why they were here was to make sure that I was all right. And I thought to myself, I was all right. What does that mean? Like, I'm fine. I didn't remember any accident. I'm fine. What do they mean I'm all right? And I kept on going that over and over in my head. And then as I watched the sunset, the sun got brighter and brighter instead of getting dimmer. It got so bright that I had to shield my eyes. And then when I opened my eyes again, I was sitting in a hospital room, and my mother was holding my hand and telling me that I had been in a terrible accident, but everything was going to be all right. But I didn't feel like everything would be all right because I was intubated. I had a tube in my mouth and I was tied down. And I often joke and laugh about it now, but I joke and say it's the first time I was tied down with my clothes on before. It was so surreal because I couldn't move. And actually, I didn't feel like anything was wrong with me. And and then finally, after a period of time, they removed the tubes, and and my brother gave me my cell phone. And it was then I'm looking at my phone and I'm realizing I knew who that lady was there, who was sending me those prayers. It was my friend Kathy. And Kathy, she was a wonderful person, just a friend. I never laid a hand on her. She was just a great person who I knew. I was on the school board. She was in charge of the Girl Scouts, and our paths crossed many times. And I'd often see her when we were walking our dogs in the woods, and we'd walk together and chat. And she's really a good person, but I used to call her Saint Kathy because she was very much into saints and things like that. And I was a kind of scary guy at the time, and so I did enjoy her company. But I recognized her energy, and I recognized the energy of the lady in that place. So I sent her a text. And I said, Kathy, thank you for visiting me when I was out, if you know what I mean. And she sent me a text back and says, and I didn't know then. I thought she was physically in the room with me. But what she was doing is she was organizing my entire town. She was having prayer circles, and they had this Facebook group, which they were, oh, Steve did this today, or Steve did that today, while I was in the coma for a month. And so that was the energy that I felt, is that I felt all this energy that she was creating, not only her energy, but all the energy in the townspeople who were directing that. And that was giving me the energy to really go forward. Like, prayers really work. I never believed in prayers. I thought it was just things that old people did. I was a biker. I just didn't understand it. And 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 that was it for a while, is that I was just so committed to getting better. And I was driving the people crazy in the hospital because I had like a walker thing, and I kept on getting out of bed, and they kept on telling me that I'm going to get them in trouble. But I wanted to get better so bad. I wanted to get better. And I knew that if I did these things 100%, I would get better. I was certain of it, even though at the time the doctors didn't think so. And I just tried so hard. And Kathy, she's an athlete. I mean, she punches like a man. I mean, she had an older brother who's like 6'2", and she's a little girl, and she just really, but she was halfway between Sergeant Slaughter and Mother Teresa. She would push me really hard, but then she would be very sweet about things too. But as I started to get better, I started to realize something. What Joey and Johnny meant about that they were there to make sure that I was all right. They didn't mean there. They meant here. John, his leg, he actually died of sepsis in his leg. And my leg was crushed. And I had to get that better. And Joey, he had his back. His back was all messed up, and he had to have all these implants in his back. And my back was messed up. I had to have all these rods, pins, and screws in my back. And it was, who better to be my spirit guides than them? And it wasn't like I heard them say one more push-up, or I even heard them communicating to me, but it was the grace. It was the same grace that I received from my higher self, that didn't give me the answers, but it gave me the ability to figure it out myself. And I couldn't tell why they felt the way that they did, but I felt this grace. And that's why I knew that if I just did these things, I would get better, because they had to go through this type of recovery as well, many times in their life. And I learned from their experiences, not from their words, but from the experiences that made up the energy which they created. And and that was great. And I just tried so hard over a period of time to get better. And like I said, Kathy and we became closer as time went on. And and then one day is that I went down in my basement. I hadn't seen my son for a while, and I was just wondering if he was playing his guitar or doing whatever. And I found him dead in our basement. It was from a drug overdose. And it was such a, I didn't know, being such an alt personality, wasn't so fun now. Is that, and it happened so soon. Like usually you have like, I mean, not usually, but from what I hear with other people, there's this long thing between drug addiction and such, but it was so quick for him. He was a Division I wrestler, a New York State champion on a scholarship to a Division I engineering school. And he was a great musician. He played the guitar, he played the saxophone, he played the piano, and it was just such a difficult thing. So heartbreaking, and I felt so terrible for my family, for my son, and for myself. I felt, what did I do wrong? It was just so difficult. And the people in my town were so kind to me. I remember the church service. There wasn't a seat. There wasn't a seat left in this big church. Everyone was lined up down the block. It was, I don't know. I just never imagined that it would happen to me and to our family. And I remember I would see all the look of people in my town. They would look at me with these sad eyes, and they were grieving too. But also, I could see also in their eyes, and it's understandable, for the grace of God, it wasn't them. And I understood this. And it was something I wrestled with for a long time. It was just a year after my accident. And this is when Kathy helped me so much, is that we would go for hikes, and I would talk to Kathy about things. But every once in a while, I'd mention to her about the place between here and there and the lessons that I learned. But I would joke about it because I didn't believe it was real. I just thought it was the drugs they gave me. And I have an active imagination, I just didn't think it was real. But Kathy never laughed, and I was drawing parallels between my experience there and my son, and perhaps some of the things that were going on for him there. That perhaps he was going through some of the things that I went through, both the challenging things and the enlightenment things. And finally, Kathy snapped at me one day and said, don't you think, what is this, by accident? You had this experience, and this is preparing you for what, that this was preparing you for what was yet to come. And later on, my cousin went to a medium and was trying to connect to one of her relatives who had passed. And the medium said, there's a Nick, that was my son's name, is trying to come through. And should she let him? And yeah, of course she did. And she gave some things about my son that only she would know. Only me, my Nick's mother and myself would know, that nobody would know that. Or maybe our close friends. And she said he had a connection with Saint Teresa, the little flower. It's a French saint that lived a couple of centuries ago. And she asked if we had been seeing roses, because she was sending roses. And I thought this was absolutely ridiculous. What, roses just appear? But we have been. When Kathy and I were walking, we're seeing roses all over the place, on the trail, on the beach, everywhere. And Kathy would say, oh, someone's sending us a message. And I would smile. I didn't want to upset her, but I knew that was all BS. No one's sending us roses. And Kathy, when she found out about what the medium was saying, that Nick had a synchronicity with Saint Teresa, I didn't believe it, but she was saying that yes, he does. You just, she knew things. And I said, well, she's probably looking on Facebook and, doing research and things like that. And she said, no, she didn't even know that my cousin was my cousin. She knew nothing about us. But I still didn't buy it. And Kathy was very frustrated with me. And then one day we were hiking in the woods, and she brought a little statue of Saint Teresa with her. And there's a brook in the woods where we'd always go, and sometimes we'd have something to eat down there, by the brook underneath the big shade tree. And she also brought a marker and some rocks, and she put the little Saint Teresa statue at the base of the tree, and she wrote a prayer on a rock for my son and put it at St. Teresa. And then we wrote a few other things for people that we know. We put it there. And she actually had a big pile of rocks that she put in her backpack. And she put the flat rocks there, and she put the magic marker there. And that was the end of it. And then we came back next week, and there were like 50 rocks there that were all, people had taken the marker and written prayers on it. And I stood there and I looked at it. And at first I thought, oh yeah, everyone has problems. But then I thought, no, I thought that we're all in this together. We're all in this together. It kind of reminds me of the Sting song, A Message in the Bottle, where he puts a message in the bottle, throws it out into the ocean, expecting an answer back. Instead, he gets 10,000 bottles back with wishes and things like that. And that brought me a lot of peace, because I realized what I was going through, my trauma, many other people go through the same or similar traumas, or traumas that are even worse, although I couldn't imagine anything worse. But you just never know. And that this energy that we all share, that we're all in this life, in this world together, we're there to help each other through these things. And that really brought me peace. It truly did. And Kathy was a big part of that piece. And that night I went home and I had this dream about my son, that all this didn't happen, that everything was okay and he was happy and everything else. But then when I woke up, as I realized, no, all this did happen, but I didn't have that intense grief anymore. I understood that, yes, that place was real. And was really intense about that is Kathy had brought a prayer card with her that the medium gave her, because she went to see the medium to find more things. And the medium said to place this at the foot of Saint Teresa. And I look on the prayer card, and it had Saint Teresa's birthday was the very same birthday that my son had. And the day that Saint Teresa was canonized, was made a saint, was the same day my son died. Like, how does that happen? Like, I can even understand one date, but 2 dates like that, and that the medium gave this to us, that I thought, wow, I thought that this is real. And so when I had that dream, like everything came full circle for me, and I began to realize that my son was going through all of the things that I had gone through as well. And that he's happy, that he's learning, and that perhaps when next time we meet, that it'll be in that other place. It'll be in our higher selves, not in a way that we are now, but the way that our true selves are, that part of us that grows over many incarnations and through our awareness. And all this will make sense, and it truly is. And now when I look back and I think about the things that had happened in my life, like I never got the impression that things were planned, but it seems like, wow, how did all this happen? That I had this crazy near-death experience, that Joey and Johnny having the same types of things that I had, that my friend Kathy with the prayers, that I learned all these things, and then I lose my son, and then I go through this process of doubting until finally I understood perhaps the true meaning of things, and it helped me through one of the most difficult things that someone could experience. And in the end of all this, what I truly learned is that life is good and people are good, even when very sad things happen. And these are just words, but if you could experience them for yourself and make them your own, you'll find peace in this world and any other world that comes after. And I truly believe that. And that's my advice to everybody. It's like don't have hate or animosity towards others who, especially those who bring you bad experiences. Don't allow them to do it. But when they happen, learn from them and grow from them and raise your awareness from them. And that's what I think this is all about. And that's what I learned from that experience. I didn't understand it was all related at first to my experience, but I learned later on, like 10 years before I had my accident and lost my son, is that I witnessed this crazy accident. It was this gentleman was driving the wrong way on the Meadowbrook Parkway on Long Island. It was 4th of July weekend, and I was coming home. It was very late at night. I was coming home from a fireworks show and a picnic, and I was driving my Harley Davidson on this parkway, and I look over, and right to my left, I saw a gentleman in a pickup truck just driving along. And I didn't think anything of it until I realized that he was driving the wrong way, that he was going northbound in the southbound lane. And there was just this little guardrail between us. And I was just trying to figure out if what I saw was really what was going on, because there was construction around. Was it a construction vehicle and such? And finally, I realized, no, he was going the wrong way. And perhaps I had to warn him about what was going on. And just then the guardrail disappeared, and there was just a little bit of ground between the two of us. And I was concerned that the gentleman would go over and run me over. So I kind of like moved over 3 lanes, and just to put a little space between us. And just then he went under an overpass, under a bridge, and went head on right into a limousine. And he killed a little girl, and he killed the limo driver. Parts were all over the place. It was a crazy scene. And but there were people immediate on scene. There were, because it was 4th of July weekend. It was a big holiday here in the U.S. And on a motorcycle, it's dangerous for you to be around such a accidents. There's parts, there's fluids on the ground, people looking at the accident, they aren't looking at you. And so I just drove home. And then I called up my friends. It was late at night, but I don't care. I woke him up and I shared with him what had happened. And he told me just get some rest. And my friend called me up the next morning, and he said in the newspaper, that accident is in the newspaper. And there were allegations that the gentleman had been drinking, and they're looking for witnesses. And I didn't come forward at first because that I thought, why? I mean, it's pretty clear. He was driving the wrong way. There's allegations of him drinking. Everybody's there. They're not looking for anybody. And I was in business with my brother, and I didn't want to get time away from work, and I didn't want the attention. We had clients and stuff. And that's the way I left it. And like the next year afterwards, I thought about it every day, because I thought about how I had a precious few seconds to do something, and I didn't. I was just there like, what am I seeing? I wasted it. I could have warned the guy, and a little girl died. And I just felt so terrible about it. It was like the first thing as I thought about every day, and the last thing as I thought about before I went to sleep at night. And then about a year later, my friend tells me, he said, you got to look at the paper. I just didn't pay attention to local happenings. I didn't get the paper. I didn't watch like local TV. I was just unaware. And there was a trial going on, and they were charging this fellow with murder. Not vehicular homicide, but murder, second-degree intentional murder. And it was the first time in the country that they were doing that. And so I thought I really had to come forward. It was a very difficult thing. I talked to my kids about it at the time, and my daughter told me to be brave, and I often told her to be brave. And so, I had to really do it. And so I contacted the police. They came down right away, took my statement, and said, absolutely, they were going to have me testify. And I did. I went to court. I testified for 2 days. The attorney was very tough on me, but I felt very confident, because me and my brother, we did business in Brooklyn, New York. There's some of those bargainers. I mean, I went to the University of Morris Weiser and Eddie Nussensweig and Eddie Berger. I went to those universities. Those people were experts, in trying to trip you up in your words. So this attorney was not going to trip me up, and I felt I represented the case very well. But the defendant was just a young kid. He wasn't a bad kid. He just made a terrible mistake that he couldn't undo. And I had very mixed feelings about this because that I was no saint, but I saw what had happened to the parents and the kids, and the families were devastated. And so I had very mixed feelings about it, but I just wanted to represent the truth as I saw it and as I remembered it. And they convicted that fellow and they sentenced him to 16 years in prison. And I felt that, wow, that was a lot. I mean, you can't undo it. And he wasn't a bad guy. He just made a terrible mistake. And the parents, God bless them, but they were so angry. They were bitter. That wasn't good enough for them. It wasn't. There was no way they were going to be healed. Their family was devastated. They lost this beautiful girl. And I just remember them. They were just unconsolable anger and bitterness. And that really stuck with me as well. And you see, I didn't think all of these things were related at the time, but they caught the guy who sold my son the drugs. I had cameras outside my house, and the guy actually brought the drugs to my house. And my son went out and got them. They actually had the exchange. And the cops were actually following this guy for several weeks because, he had been selling these drugs that had been hurting people, and they were hospitalized and such. And so I went to go to the trial. And I got such hatred and anger up in my heart I don't know how to tell you, but I wanted to tell that guy what I felt about what he did to my family, my beautiful son who had so much of future together. A 20-year-old kid granted my son bought the drugs, but a 20-year-old kid isn't even allowed to buy alcohol in the United States because they're not old enough to make those decisions. And I was just so bitter about it. And when I got there, I saw the kid. He was a kid, no older than the kid who was involved in that terrible limo accident so many years ago. I couldn't be angry at him. I couldn't. I felt terrible for him. I felt that I just wanted things to be better. He couldn't undo what had happened. I just didn't want him to do those things anymore. And it didn't make sense to me to have two lives ruined. I understood he had a debt to society and they had to protect us from people who would do those things and to set an example. And I understand all those things. And that's why people like me don't make laws or enforce them. But I just felt terrible for him. And I actually felt love for him, that I wanted things to be better. I wanted him to have a good life. I wanted him to serve his time honorably. And you see, it's not that I'm such a virtuous person, because I'm not. I'm more a sinner than a saint. But what I learned is that from having that experience with the limo driver and the young kid being killed and that perpetrator and the similarities between these things, is that I learned from that. And I think that truly when I had my life experience in that place, that whole experience was part of my life experience. And I learned from that. I truly learned from that. And then that gave me the wisdom, the understanding that when I was put in the very same situation, that I reacted differently. Once again, not because I was so virtuous, but because I had these precious experiences. And so when I look back at everything and they convicted that fellow and sentenced him to second-degree murder as well. And I look at all these synchronicities between these things and, are these things unrelated? Is there a plan? Is it just dumb luck that these things happen? This is a question that I go in my mind over and over again. And it all comes down to signs and synchronicities. they're all around us and we see them. And so many times we ignore them, but they're really there to show us messages, whether it was the flowers that Kathy and I were seeing, or the Saint Teresa's birthday and canonization days and those significant dates in my brother's life, or the parents being so angry and then me being put in the situations, or Joey and John and their experiences and how they helped me get through it. Like, these are all signs and synchronizations. And just finally, I would just like to say is that, yes, I did write a book. I wrote a book with my friend Kathy. And when we were writing our book, it was during the health crisis, which we all faced several years ago, that locked down the entire world. And Kathy and I, we had plenty of time together. So we'd go to walks on the beach, and we would discuss, what had happened and some of the things that we wanted to say. And Kathy collected beach glass, the glass that washes up on the beach and is weathered. And she was praying to Saint Germain, the violet flame, another one of her saints. And she was praying to it to heal the world. And so if it wasn't for Kathy, things would have been a lot worse. But she wanted to see a sign from Saint Germain that he's hearing her prayers. And so she asked to find violet beach glass. You would find hen's teeth or, a diamond on the shores of Long Island before you would find violet beach glass. There's plenty of brown beach glass and green beach glass from all the beer bottles and things like that, but you would never find violet beach glass because of her saint, the violet flame. And so we were done walking on the beach one day, and she didn't find the violet beach glass, and I was getting ready to comfort her and tell her, no, it'd be okay. And just then, this Dalmatian puppy, the white dog with all the black spots on it, come running behind a sand dune, starts jumping all over us. And we love dogs, so we are hugging the dog and petting it and, playing it. And the owner comes from behind the sand dune and said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." And she gets the dog, puts on a leash. And we were like, no, we love dogs. And we start chatting with this lady, Kathy. She loves to chat. So she asked, "What's the dog's name?" And so she said the dog's name was Violet. And Kathy didn't get it. We're walking away and she starts pouting again about the violet beach glass. And I say to Kathy, "The dog's name is Violet." And she finally got it. And that was what was it. So we went home and we walked on that beach, pretty much every day during that health crisis we faced. And we saw the lady again. And she was there with her dog. And so we go running up to her. We start chatting with her again. And so I asked her, I said, "How is this dog's name is Violet? It's a black dog, a white dog with black spots on it. And how does it become violet?" And she said that her son and her, their favorite movie was this old movie, Gone with the Wind. And Scarlett O'Hara, at one scene in the movie, she had this big violet dress on. And so she named the dog Violet, but she spelled it the way Scarlett spells her name. And she told me her son passed away about a year ago. And so when she got the dog, that she named it Violet to honor not only her son, but her and her son's special relationship. How does that happen? Like that I had that situation. She had her situation. We both lost our sons. And then this violet beach glass and the violet flame and everything, this chance meeting, was that all chance? I don't think so. That's what I was saying about signs and synchronicities. Like, these signs and synchronicities, they bring us together. So many times, like, people will see a sign and they'll get so excited about the sign, as opposed to trying to find out why you are receiving this message. And these signs and synchronicities are like signposts along the way to guide you to an understanding. And that's what it did for us, because we became very good friends. And I thought I was healed from my son's experience and my experience. And she thought the same thing. But now we had an opportunity to talk and grow together and understand and help each other. And so, was this an accident, or was this our sons, both of our sons, bringing us together? because they felt our pain. See, that's one of the most important things. When you see these signs and synchronicities, don't dismiss them. Don't be a doubting Stevie like I was. There are lots of hokey things that go on in this world, but some things are true, and you really have to open up your heart and open up your mind to really receive that beautiful grace that's out there. You just have to accept it. And so my book, this wonderful book that I wrote with Kathy, it's called The Place Between Here and There. It's available on Amazon, The Place Between Here and There. And if you want to contact me, just send email to Stephen, Stephen, Weber, Weber.com. Just send me an email. I'll be glad to answer it. We also have a website, StephenWeber.com. And that's the best way to reach out and chat and let us know what's going on in your life, or perhaps ask a question. We do our best to answer as many questions as we get, although sometimes there are a lot of them, and I try to address them when I have an opportunity to speak before these podcasts. I try to include them in as well.